My father lifted his champagne glass toward my sister and smiled, like she was the greatest accomplishment of his life. "Vanessa has my instincts," he announced to the ballroom. "That ability to lead, to close deals, to command a room." More applause rolled across the hotel ballroom. Crystal chandeliers glowed over 150 guests, executives, investors, family friends, people who had spent decades admiring Richard Hale. Then his eyes shifted toward me. "And Miriam," he laughed softly. "Well, every family needs supporters too." A few people chuckled. I felt my stomach drop. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. I was sitting at the back of the room beside my husband, while my younger sister occupied a VIP table near the stage. That alone should have warned me what kind of night this would become. My father continued smiling into the microphone. "Not everyone is built to lead. Some people are happier staying small." Several guests turned to look directly at me. I forced a tight smile even though my face burned. Suddenly I was 12 again at Christmas dinner, listening to my parents praise Vanessa's future, while asking me whether teaching was just a phase. 22 again, hearing my mother introduce my sister as our ambitious one, before describing me as comfortable. 35 again, sitting through another family party, where my career somehow became a punchline. Beside me, Daniel went completely still. I touched his arm immediately. "Please don't," I whispered. He kept staring at the stage. My father raised his glass again. Vanessa inherited my drive, Miriam inherited her mother's softness. Even my mother laughed nervously. That hurt more than the joke itself. Around us, phones lifted. People were recording the speech now. Daniel stood up slowly. At first, nobody reacted. Then nearby conversations started fading as people noticed him walking toward the stage. My father smirked like he expected Daniel to offer some harmless toast to smooth everything over. Instead, my husband climbed the steps, took the microphone from the event coordinator, and turned toward my father. The entire ballroom went silent. Daniel looked directly at him. "Do you even know who you're talking about?" For the first time all night, my father's smile disappeared. The ballroom erupted instantly. Conversations overlapped. Chairs scraped against the floor. Several executives near the front turned toward each other with sudden interest instead of outrage. One of them actually raised a hand towards security. "Wait," he said, "let him speak." That changed everything. Because now this wasn't just a family argument anymore. My father noticed it too. Vanessa crossed her arms and looked at Daniel like he was insane. "You're jealous," she snapped. "Miriam chose a quieter life. Nobody forced her to become a teacher." Daniel looked at her calmly. "You really believe that?" "Because it's true." My father stepped closer to him. "Enough." But Daniel continued anyway. 6 years ago, Hale Strategic nearly collapsed during the Northbridge expansion. The room went dead silent. Several executives exchanged immediate looks. Everyone there knew that project. My father had spent years publicly calling it one of his greatest successes. Daniel's voice stayed level. Internal projections showed employee retirement funds could have been wiped out if the restructuring failed. A woman near the front table frowned. "Richard, is that true?" My father answered quickly. The issue was resolved legally and professionally. Daniel nodded once. "Not by you." I felt my chest tighten. I had never wanted this story exposed publicly, not like this. My father looked at me then, not guilty, not ashamed. "Warning me." As if I was somehow responsible for what Daniel was saying. Daniel turned slightly toward the crowd. "Miriam studied finance before she became a teacher," he said. "When Richard's health collapsed during the crisis, she spent months rebuilding internal models and tracking accounting discrepancies nobody else caught." Several people stared at me now with visible confusion. I wanted to disappear. Vanessa blinked hard. "What?" She worked behind the scenes because Richard didn't want the board, knowing his daughter had to step in and save the company. "That is not what happened," my father snapped. Daniel's expression hardened for the first time all night. "She emptied her savings helping keep your legal team operational." A wave of whispers swept through the ballroom. I turned toward Daniel in shock. Because I had never told him everything about that period. Yet somehow he knew. Then he reached inside his suit jacket and placed a thick folder onto the podium. The second my father saw it, the color drained from his face. And that terrified me more than anything else so far. Daniel rested one hand on the folder. And that's not even the worst part. People started moving closer to the stage instead of leaving. Phones were fully raised now. Nobody cared about the retirement dinner anymore. My father grabbed the edge of the podium. This event is over. No one listened. Daniel opened the folder slowly and removed several printed emails. I had never seen them before. Not once. One executive near the front stepped closer. Richard, what exactly is this? Daniel handed him the top page. It's part of the recovery correspondence from the Northbridge crisis. My father's jaw tightened. Those documents are confidential. But the executive was already reading. Then his expression changed. He looked up sharply at my father. You removed her names. A pulse of confusion moved through the room. Daniel spoke before my father could answer. Every recovery report originally credited Miriam's restructuring analysis. Richard deleted her involvement before presenting the final version to the board. Someone near the back muttered, "You're kidding." "I wish I was," Daniel replied. Another executive took the second page. My stomach dropped as I recognized my own formatting notes buried inside the document. I had written those reports at my parents' dining room table while my father recovered upstairs after his stress-induced collapse. Back then, he told me nobody could know I was involved because the company needed stability. I believed him. Daniel pulled out another sheet. This email explains why. He handed it directly to Vanessa. She scanned the page once. Then again. Slowly, her face lost all color. I could see the sentence reflected in her eyes before she finally whispered it aloud. The board cannot think my schoolteacher daughter rescued this company. Silence. Complete silence. My mother stood abruptly. Your father was protecting the family image. That hit harder than every insult before it. Not because she defended him. Because she said it like it was reasonable. Like my entire life had been reduced to a branding problem. I felt something inside me finally crack. Daniel looked at me carefully before speaking again. I found these years ago while helping Richard digitize company records, he said. I stayed quiet because Miriam still believed her parents would acknowledge her eventually. I couldn't even deny it. For years, I kept waiting for one sincere moment. One. Instead, my father humiliated me in front of a ballroom full of strangers. Now executives were confronting him openly. Were shareholder disclosures altered? Who else knew about this? Did legal approve these reports? Vanessa was still staring at the email in her hands like her entire childhood suddenly made sense. My father finally exploded. Everything I built was for this family. And before fear could stop me again, I stood up. No, I said quietly, everything was built for your image. At that exact moment, hotel security entered the ballroom. My father pointed directly at Daniel. But the event organizer walked past him and asked my father to step away from the stage immediately. The ballroom no longer sounded like a celebration. It sounded like damage control. Clusters of executives whispered near the stage, while board members disappeared with my father into a private conference room beside the ballroom. My mother followed them halfway before stopping in the doorway, suddenly unsure which side of the room she belonged on. I stayed frozen in my chair. Everything around me blurred together. The chandeliers, the music that had quietly stopped, the guests pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. Daniel knelt beside me carefully. I'm sorry, he said softly, but I couldn't let him do it again. For a moment I couldn't answer. Because suddenly every memory connected in ways I had never allowed myself to fully see before. Every compliment redirected toward Vanessa. Every achievement of mine minimized. Every moment where compassion, loyalty, and sacrifice were treated like evidence that I lacked ambition. My father hadn't accidentally overlooked me. He had intentionally reduced me. I looked at Daniel. How long have you known? Not everything at first, he admitted, but enough. His voice stayed calm, steady. When I helped your father digitize company files years ago, I found the original reports. Your name was everywhere in the drafts, then nowhere in the final versions. I swallowed hard. And you never told me. You still wanted their approval, he said gently. I thought exposing it would hurt you more than help you. That was the worst part. He was right. Even after years of humiliation, part of me still kept hoping my parents would someday look at me with pride, instead of disappointment. Vanessa approached slowly then. For the first time in my life, she looked uncertain around me. I didn't know, she said quietly. I didn't answer immediately. She glanced toward the conference room where our father had disappeared. I really thought you just didn't want more. I looked directly at her. Did either of you ever wonder why I stopped trying to be seen? Vanessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. My mother looked away first. And in that silence, the truth finally settled over all of us. 6 years earlier, my father's expansion project had nearly destroyed his company. Internal losses had been concealed too long. Retirement funds tied to company performance were suddenly at risk. Investors were preparing to pull out. While my father collapsed under the pressure, I rebuilt financial projections from scratch, identified reporting discrepancies, and helped structure emergency recommendations that stabilized negotiations long enough to stop the collapse. I drained my own savings, helping keep legal and compliance teams functioning during the crisis, because payroll delays had started spreading internally. My father promised nobody could know I was involved until things stabilized. But stability came. Recognition never did. Instead, my work disappeared from every final report before they reached the board. External consultants received public credit. And afterward, my father pushed Vanessa into the spotlight harder than ever because she matched the image he wanted attached to the Hale name. Confident, aggressive, corporate, not a teacher, not me. An hour later, the consequences had already started. 2 board members left the conference room looking furious. 1 investor refused photos with my father before leaving entirely. Another executive quietly informed guests that Richard Hale's advisory appointments were being suspended pending internal review of disclosure practices. The retirement celebration was over. By the end of the night, people weren't talking about my father's career. They were talking about what he hid. Vanessa left early without speaking to reporters waiting outside the hotel. My mother tried stopping me near the lobby elevators. Miriam, she said shakily, your father thought he was protecting all of us. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I answered honestly. You protected his reputation more than your daughter. She started crying before I even walked away. But for once I didn't stop to comfort her. Days later, former employees from Hale Strategic started contacting me privately after word spread through professional circles. One retired employee wrote, "My pension survived because of decisions you made, we never knew." I read that message 3 times. Not because I needed validation anymore. Because for the first time, the truth existed outside my father's control. I went back to teaching the following week. Same classroom. Same students. But it felt different now. Not smaller. Not lesser. Chosen. Months later, I received an invitation to speak at a leadership conference about ethical crisis management in education and corporate systems. I actually laughed when I read the topic. Daniel watched me from across the kitchen. You going to accept it? I smiled. Yeah, I said, I think I will. The final time I saw my father was briefly at a legal mediation meeting connected to the internal investigations. He looked older, quieter, stripped of the certainty that used to fill every room he entered. He tried once to tell me he had done what he thought was necessary. But I didn't need explanations anymore. By then, I understood something he never did. A person's value doesn't disappear just because someone powerful refuses to acknowledge it. Months later, I stepped onto another stage alone. Only this time I didn't feel invisible. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need my family to see my value, because everyone else finally could.